The bracket appeared on every wall in the crucible at exactly the same moment, and Senna Akafer watched 64 names arrange themselves into a branching tree that terminated in a single empty box at the top. Her name was in the lower left quadrant. Beside it, a species tag she'd seen on every piece of paperwork since she'd arrived at the Korathi Unified Combat Institute 3 months ago, Terran. The only one on the bracket, the only one in the building. Around her, the common hall buzzed with the low-frequency vibrations that passed for conversation among the Korathi. They were tall, narrow-bodied beings with translucent skin stretched over bioluminescent musculature, and when they spoke, the light patterns in their chest cavities did most of the communicating. Words came second, almost an afterthought, a concession to the other species in the room who couldn't read photonic pulse language. The Korathi didn't think in words. They thought in light. And their combat doctrine, their teaching methods, their entire institutional architecture was built on the assumption that information moved at the speed of luminescence. Senna's information moved at the speed of synaptic chemistry, slower by orders of magnitude, but it moved differently, and 3 months at the Korathi Unified Combat Institute had taught her that differently was not the same as worse. The bracket was for the Crucible tournament. Every cycle, the 64 highest-scoring cadets were seeded into a single elimination combat bracket. 8 rounds, 6 days, 1 winner. The winner received priority fleet assignment, a notation in their permanent record that followed them through every command they'd ever hold, and more importantly, the institutional respect that came with having survived the most visible test the Institute administered. Senna had scored 39th in the qualifying rankings, low seed, expected to lose in the first or second round. The Korathi cadets in the top 10 had been training for this tournament since before they could form full sentences, their bioluminescent patterns drilled into combat-specific frequencies that could blind, disorient, or overwhelm an opponent's visual processing before the first strike landed. She didn't have bioluminescent anything. She had 2 hands, 2 feet, a cardiovascular system built for sustained output, and a brain that refused to process information the way the Institute expected. The briefing officer, a senior Korathi instructor named Prahl, stood at the front of the common hall. Prahl's chest cavity pulsed in slow, deliberate patterns, the pedagogical frequency, the one that meant listen and absorb. Senna had learned to read a few dozen Korathi light patterns by now, not fluently, enough. The Crucible operates under graduated lethality protocols, Prahl said. The words followed the light by half a second, always trailing. Round 1 through 4, restrained force, yield or incapacitation ends the bout. Round 5 through 8, open force, yield, incapacitation, or inability to continue. Medical teams are stationed at ringside. The Institute accepts no liability for injury sustained under open force rules. A Korathi cadet named Vesk, seated 2 rows ahead of Senna, turned its translucent head and let its chest pulse something sharp and staccato toward her. Senna couldn't read the exact pattern, but the body language was universal enough. Vesk was seated 7th. Senna was seated 39th. The message was clear: enjoy your one bout. Senna didn't react. She turned back to the bracket on the wall and studied her first-round opponent, a Dreven cadet named Morith. The Dreven were compact, dense-boned quadrupeds who fought from a low center of gravity, using their 4 limbs for both locomotion and grappling. They were strong, patient, and nearly impossible to take to the ground because they were already there. She'd watched Morith train. Morith was methodical. Every movement had a purpose. Every engagement followed a calculated sequence. Attack, test response, recalibrate, commit. Standard Korathi-trained tactical processing, adapted for Dreven physiology. The problem with methodical, Senna had learned in her first week at the Institute, was that it assumed the opponent would respond within the expected parameters. Senna pulled up Morith's training footage on her datapad, reviewed it twice, Then set the pad down and went to find something to eat before the first round started in the morning. She stopped at the training hall on her way. In the far corner, a Korathi cadet was drilling against a practice dummy calibrated to Terran physiology, running combinations designed to exploit the human joint structure. Precise, methodical, studying the Terran body the way Senna had studied theirs, but the dummy was calibrated to a standard Terran male profile, taller and heavier than Senna. The cadet was preparing for a human that wasn't her. That gap was data she could use. She took the long corridor to the mess. The corridor walls pulsed with the ambient bioluminescence of the Institute's living architecture, a soft teal glow that Senna had spent her first week learning not to find unsettling. Everything in this place was alive. The walls, the floors, the ceiling. She'd been the only human in the building for 3 months. Not the first ever. 12 Terrans had attended the Korathi Unified Combat Institute before her, and all 12 had washed out before the end of basic training. None had qualified for the Crucible. Senna was the 13th, and she was in the bracket. The mess hall was half empty. Most cadets were reviewing opponents, drilling sequences, or running through the light pattern meditation exercises that the Korathi used to sharpen their reflexes. Senna ate a protein ration from the Terran supplement kit the Institute had grudgingly added to the food stores, drank water, and thought about the tournament bracket. 64 cadets entered, 1 came out, 63 lost. Something about that math had been bothering her since the bracket appeared, and she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. A Driven cadet named Kor sat down across from her, its 4 legs folding neatly beneath the table. Kor was not in the tournament bracket. Kor had ranked 68th, 4 places short of qualification, and had been carrying that fact in the rigid set of its armored shoulders for 2 days. "They say you are expected to lose in the first round," Kor said. "They're probably right. And yet you are eating dinner instead of training." Senna looked at the protein ration in her hand. "My body processes food into energy over a 6-hour cycle. If I eat now, I'm fueled for the morning. If I train now, I'm fatigued for the morning. The math is straightforward." Kor's dense skull tilted. "You speak of combat the way the Korathi speak of mathematics. I speak of it the way someone who can't glow in the dark has to speak of it." She took another bite. "Preparation, calculation, efficiency. I can't overwhelm anyone's visual cortex with my chest, so I have to overwhelm their tactical assumptions with my planning." Kor clicked its front feet on the table surface. The Driven gesture that Senna had learned meant something between amusement and respect. Perhaps 68th was not so far from the bracket after all. Kor left. Senna finished the protein ration and considered the Driven's observation. 68th. 4 places short of qualification. 1 bad day, 1 slower time on the obstacle assessment, 1 instructor's subjective evaluation tilting a fraction in the wrong direction, and Kor would have been in the bracket instead of watching from the sidelines. The margin between qualification and exclusion was so narrow it barely existed, but the consequences of being on the wrong side of that margin would follow Kor for the rest of a military career. The Institute processed everything through ranking. Even mess hall seating was arranged by standing, the highest-ranked cadets nearest the panoramic viewport that looked out at the gas giant's banded atmosphere, the lowest near the service corridor where the recycled air carried a faint metallic taste. Kor sat in the middle, neither rewarded nor punished, simply sorted. The combat ring was a circular platform, 10 meters across, surfaced with a material that absorbed impact and adjusted its friction coefficient in real time to prevent inadvertent slipping. The ring was surrounded by tiered seating that rose in a steep amphitheater, every seat occupied. The Crucible tournament was the Institute's premier spectacle, and every cadet, instructor, and administrator who could be present was. Senna stood at her entry point and felt the weight of 3,000 pairs of eyes. The Korathi in the audience pulsed their chest cavities in spectator patterns, a low collective hum of anticipation that made the air itself seem to glow. The lighting in the arena was calibrated for Korathi visual processing, heavy on the ultraviolet end, which made everything look slightly washed out to Senna's eyes, but lit the Korathi fighters like living neon. Morith entered from the opposite side. The Driven was compact, its 4 limbs planted wide, its dense skull lowered in the pre-engagement posture Senna had seen in the training footage. Morith's eyes, small and set deep in armored sockets, fixed on Senna with the patient focus of a species that had never needed to rush anything. The tone sounded, the bout began. Morith advanced, steady, deliberate, closing the distance at a pace designed to test Senna's patience. The Korathi training doctrine taught that the fighter who controlled the tempo controlled the fight, and Morith's tempo was glacial. 1 step, 2, a slight shift of the leading limbs, testing Senna's reaction to lateral movement. Senna moved sideways, not retreating, not advancing, circling, keeping the distance constant, forcing Morith to adjust heading with each step, bleeding small amounts of energy into the rotational correction. 30 seconds, a minute, the amphitheater's spectator hum shifted. The Korathi audience expected decisive engagement within the first 20 seconds. This was wrong. This was the human failing to meet the expected pace. Morith committed. The Driven's rear limbs drove forward in a surge of dense-boned power, front limbs reaching to grapple. The textbook Driven close-quarters entry that used mass and low center of gravity to collapse an opponent's stance. Senna dropped, not away from the charge but under it, her body going flat, one hand on the mat surface for stability, and she slid beneath Morith's reaching forelimbs on the low-friction surface. The ring's smart material, calibrated for upright fighting, didn't know what to do with a body that was suddenly horizontal, and for a half-second, Senna moved across the surface like water on glass. She came up behind Morith, on her feet before the Driven had finished its charge, and put a precise open palm strike into the nerve cluster at the base of Morith's skull, where the dense bone thinned enough to transmit force. Morith's 4 legs buckled, not unconscious, stunned. The Driven's eyes went wide and unfocused, and its limbs moved in the slow, uncoordinated pattern that meant its motor control was temporarily disrupted. Senna stepped back and waited. The referee, a senior Korathi with deep-set light patterns that pulsed in the judicial frequency, watched Morith struggle to regain coordination. After 8 seconds, the referee signaled incapacitation. Round over. The amphitheater was quiet. Then the spectator hum resumed, but in a different register. Senna had seen the shift before. It was the pattern the Korathi used when observing something that didn't fit their predictive model. She left the ring without looking at the audience and went to the recovery area to stretch her shoulders. Behind her, Morith was being helped off the platform by the medical team. The Driven's motor control would return in 20 minutes. The nerve disruption was temporary. Senna had made sure of that because she knew exactly how hard to hit that spot to stun without damaging, and she knew it because she'd practiced on training dummies calibrated to Driven anatomy for 3 weeks before the tournament. She'd prepared for every opponent in her quadrant, not just Morith, everyone. In the recovery area, she watched the next bout on the wall-mounted display. 2 Korathi, both high seeds, their chest cavities blazing in combat frequencies that turned the ring into a light show. The fight lasted 11 seconds. The higher seed overwhelmed the lower seed's visual processing with a harmonic pattern that caused involuntary motor shutdown, then delivered a clean strike before the lower seed's body recovered. Textbook. Efficient. Beautiful if you could see in the right frequencies. The losing cadet was carried out on a medical stretcher, its chest light flickering in the erratic patterns of neural disruption. Its eyes were open but unfocused. It would recover in hours, but its tournament was over in 11 seconds, and its record would carry the mark of a first-round elimination for the rest of its career. Senna watched the stretcher pass and felt the first sharp edge of the thing that had been bothering her. Round 2 was against a Korathi cadet named Tail, mid-seed, technically competent, with a bioluminescent combat pattern that was designed to overwhelm an opponent's visual cortex through rapid frequency cycling. Against another Korathi, it would have been effective. Against a Dreven or most other species in the Institute, it would have been devastating. Against Senna, it was a flashlight. Human visual processing didn't lock onto bioluminescent frequencies the way Korathi eyes did. The flicker was distracting, nothing more. Senna had spent 2 weeks training with tinted lenses that filtered out the combat spectrum wavelengths, and then she'd taken the lenses off and trained without them until her brain learned to register the flicker as background noise. Tail opened with a full-spectrum pulse. The amphitheater audience recoiled from the edges of it, cadets in the first rows shielding their chest cavities from the sympathetic resonance. Senna blinked once and kept moving. Tail pulsed again, harder, the equivalent of shouting at someone who hadn't flinched at the first shout. Senna closed the distance during the second pulse, while Tail's musculature was fully committed to the luminescent output and therefore not committed to anything structural. She caught Tail's leading arm at the elbow and the wrist, applied a joint lock that leveraged the Korathi's own narrow build against it, and held. Tail tried to pulse. The arm lock made it impossible to generate a coherent chest pattern. The Korathi's photonic communication and combat display system required the musculature of the upper body to be in a specific configuration, and Senna's lock disrupted that configuration completely. Without its light, Tail froze. Senna could feel the panic in the Korathi's body, the sudden absence of its primary sensory and communication channel. For a Korathi, losing the ability to pulse was like going deaf and mute simultaneously. Tail's free hand struck weakly at Senna's grip, but the angle was wrong, the force was wrong. Everything was wrong because Tail's entire combat doctrine assumed the light would create the opening and the body would follow. Senna held the lock for 4 seconds. Then she shifted, turned Tail, and put the Korathi on the mat with a controlled takedown that landed Tail on its back with enough force to end the bout, but not enough to injure. The referee signaled. The amphitheater hummed in that same off-frequency pattern, the anomaly register. After the bout, Senna sat in the recovery area and pulled up the bracket on her datapad. 2 names eliminated, Morith and Tail. Both would return to their regular training rotations. Their tournament run ended. Their records would note a first-round and second-round loss, respectively, and those records would follow them into their fleet assignments, their command evaluations, every promotion board they'd ever face. She found Tail in the medical bay afterward. The Korathi was sitting upright on a treatment slab, chest light dim to the flat pattern of exhaustion. "The arm lock," Senna said. "Does it still hurt?" "The joint is undamaged." The medic confirmed full function. "Good. I calibrated the pressure to the tolerance threshold in the Korathi field manual. I wanted to make sure the number was right." Tail stared at her. "You studied our anatomy specifically to ensure you would not injure me." "I studied your anatomy specifically to ensure I could win without injuring you." "There's a difference." "I do not understand the difference." Neither did Senna entirely. She left the medical bay and went back to reviewing the bracket. 16 cadets remained after the first round. 11 were Korathi, 3 were Dreven, 1 was Vrelian, 1 was Terran. The system wasn't testing combat ability in the abstract. It was testing combat ability as defined by Korathi doctrine, measured by Korathi metrics, in an environment calibrated to Korathi physiology. Every species in the tournament was fighting on away territory except the Korathi. Round 3 brought her against a cadet she'd been dreading, a Vrelian named Sok. The Vrelians were a predator species, quick, fluid, with flexible skeletal structures that let them change direction mid-movement in ways that broke Senna's predictive timing. Their combat doctrine was instinct-based, not analytical, a constantly adapting flow of attack and response that didn't follow patterns because it didn't think in patterns. Sock was 8th seed. Senna was supposed to lose here. The amphitheater's pre-bout hum was different for this match. Senna could feel the shift in the collective light pulse as she entered the ring, a heightened frequency that meant the audience's predictive models had been updated. They were no longer expecting a quick human elimination. They were expecting something else, and the uncertainty of what that something else might be was producing a spectator energy she hadn't felt before. Sock entered from the opposite side, and Senna's first thought was that the Vrelian moved like water given a skeleton. Every step was fluid, every transition seamless, the entire body operating as a single continuous system, rather than the collection of jointed segments that bipedal and quadrupedal species used. The Vrelian's eyes, wide-set and gold, tracked Senna with the unfocused attention of a predator that doesn't need to look directly at something to see it. The tone sounded. The bout lasted 4 minutes, the longest of the tournament so far. Sock was fast, unpredictable, and its flexible body bent away from Senna's strikes in ways that violated her muscle memory. Twice, Sock caught her with glancing blows that would have been devastating if the Vrelian had committed more force. 3 times, Senna's counters hit empty air where Sock had been a quarter-second before. She adapted, not by getting faster because she couldn't, not by predicting Sock's movements because they were genuinely unpredictable. She adapted by changing what she was trying to do. She stopped trying to hit Sock and started trying to control the space. The ring was 10 meters across. Sock's advantage was lateral movement, the ability to flow sideways, curl around attacks, change direction. That advantage depended on having space to move into. Senna tightened her footwork, cut angles, positioned herself not where Sock was but where Sock's movement options were richest. She didn't pursue the Vrelian. She herded it. 3 minutes in, Sock's movement options had narrowed from a full circle to a 40-degree arc. The Vrelian's instinct-based processing recognized the constriction too late. Sock surged to break free, and Senna was waiting at the gap with a low sweep that caught the Vrelian's lead leg mid-transition, when the flexible skeleton was extended and vulnerable. Sock went down. The Vrelian's body curled, reflexive, trying to recover, but Senna was on top of the movement, controlling the follow-through, and she put Sock in a position where the only options were yield or accept a joint extension that the Vrelian's flexibility wouldn't survive. Sock yielded. The Vrelian's body went limp in the submission hold, the predator instinct recognizing a position from which there was no escape. Senna released the hold immediately, stepped back, and offered Sock a hand. The Vrelian looked at the extended hand with an expression that crossed species lines without translation. Nobody had ever offered that after a bout. Sock didn't take the hand, but the Vrelian's eyes held Senna's for a moment before it turned and left the ring, and the look wasn't hostile. It was the look of something being filed away for later processing. Senna watched Sock leave and realized she'd been holding her breath. The sweep had been precisely targeted at the transition point in the Vrelian's skeleton, the moment of maximum extension and maximum vulnerability. She'd calculated that strike weeks ago. A stronger sweep at that angle would have dislocated the joint permanently. She'd controlled the force because she'd chosen to. And the fact that the choice existed, that the margin between ending a tournament and ending a career was measured in pounds of pressure, sat in her chest like a stone. 3 cadets eliminated, 3 records permanently marked, and she was getting better at it, more efficient, more clinical. Getting better at winning meant getting better at making other people lose. The amphitheater's hum changed again, not the anomaly frequency this time. Something lower, more complex. Senna couldn't read it fully, but the instructor who escorted her out of the ring, a mid-rank Korathi named Delenn, translated it for her as they walked. They are recalibrating. Recalibrating what? Their model of you. Senna paused. They had a model of me. Everyone has a model of everyone. Yours was straightforward, Terran, slow visual processing, limited sensory range, cardiovascular advantage at endurance, disadvantage at burst, predicted elimination, round 2. Delen's chest pulsed in a flat, informational pattern. You are in round 4. The model is incorrect. They are recalibrating. What's the new model? Delen looked at her. The Koratha's expression was unreadable, but the chest light was steady. There is not one yet. That is what the recalibration means. That evening, Senna found Kor in the mess hall again. The Dreven who hadn't made the bracket was watching the tournament results on a display panel, its dense skull angled to track the data scrolling past. 3 rounds, Kor said without looking up. You have defeated a Dreven, a Korathi, and a Vrelian, 3 different species, 3 different combat doctrines, 3 different anatomies. I've been studying all of them for 3 months. No, you have been studying all of them while they have been studying only the Korathi way. That is the difference. Kor turned its small eyes toward her. They train in 1 doctrine, you prepared for 6. Senna sat down. I didn't have a choice. The Korathi doctrine doesn't work for my body. Their visual processing tricks don't work with my eyes. Their timing systems don't match my reflexes. I had to build a separate approach for every species I might face. And that is why you are winning. Not because you are better, because you are more prepared to face difference. There's a cost to that, Senna said. She hadn't planned to say it. It came out anyway. Every approach I built is designed to find the specific vulnerability of a specific species and exploit it. I'm not fighting opponents. I'm dismantling them. I study their anatomy until I find the structural weakness, their combat doctrine until I find the tactical gap, and then I build a plan that goes straight at both. Kor's skull tilted. Is that not what every fighter does? Every fighter tries to win. I'm engineering losses. I know exactly what will happen before the tone sounds. I know how Morith will charge and where the nerve cluster is. I know Tail's light trick will fail and the arm lock will disable the chest musculature. I know Sock's flexibility has a transition window and the sweep will catch it. She paused. I'm not reacting. I'm executing. And the cadets I executed against walk out of the ring, carrying a loss they didn't see coming, because I spent 3 weeks designing it specifically for them. Kor was quiet for a long time. Then, you are describing skill. I'm describing what skill costs the people it's used against. Kor clicked its feet once and left. Senna stared at the tournament bracket on the display and counted the names that were struck through. Half the field was gone. Tomorrow, another quarter would follow. The bracket narrowed toward its single empty box with the mechanical precision of a filtration system, doing exactly what it was designed to do. She pulled up the next day's matchup, quarterfinals. Her opponent was Pren, 4th seed. She opened Pren's training data and began building the approach that would take the 4th seed apart, and she hated that she was good at it, and she did it anyway. Round 4 was the quarterfinal. Senna's opponent was a Korathi named Pren, 4th seed, one of the tournament favorites. Pren was tall even by Korathi standards, with a chest cavity that could produce luminescent patterns at frequencies most other Korathi couldn't match. In combat, Pren used a technique called harmonic stacking, layering multiple frequencies simultaneously to create a dissonant visual interference pattern that disrupted coordination in any species with photosensitive neural pathways. Senna's neural pathways weren't photosensitive, not in the way the technique required. But the harmonic stacking was only Pren's opener. Behind it was a Korathi who had spent years perfecting the physical combat doctrine that the light was supposed to create opportunities for. Pren was fast, technically precise, and had never lost to anyone seated below 10th. The bout started with the harmonic stack. Pren's chest blazed with overlapping frequencies, and even Senna, whose visual cortex didn't lock onto the patterns, felt a momentary disorientation from the sheer intensity of the output. The amphitheater audience leaned back. Several lower-ranked cadets in the front rows covered their optical organs. Senna closed her eyes. The amphitheater went silent. Senna stood in the ring with her eyes closed, her hands at her sides, and listened. She'd been training for this for 6 weeks, since she'd first learned about harmonic stacking from an instructor's offhand mention. She'd asked a simple question that no Korathi cadet had ever thought to ask. What does a Korathi fighter sound like? The answer was, everything sounds like something. Feet on the mat surface produced micro-vibrations. Breathing displaced air. Body mass shifting created pressure differentials. And Korathi bioluminescent musculature, when firing at combat frequencies, hummed. Not loudly. Not in a range most species would notice. But humans had evolved alongside predators that hunted in darkness. And the part of the human brain that processed sound was older, deeper, and more finely calibrated than any Korathi model gave it credit for. Pren attacked. Senna heard the change in the hum, the shift in the muscular frequency that preceded the physical movement by a fraction of a second. She stepped offline, felt the air displace where Pren's strike passed, and countered with a body shot that landed clean on the Korathi's midsection. Pren staggered. The harmonic stack cut out. The amphitheater erupted in a spectator pattern Senna had never heard before, a rapid oscillation between disbelief and something that had no direct translation. Senna opened her eyes. Pren was backing away, chest light flickering erratically, the combat posture broken. The Korathi had never been hit while stacking. No one had ever navigated through the harmonic interference to land a clean blow. "You closed your eyes," Pren said. The words came slow, trailing the frantic light language that Senna couldn't read. "You removed your primary sensory channel." "I removed the channel you were attacking," Senna said. "I have others." Pren's chest went dark for a full second. When it relit, the pattern was different. Focused. The Korathi had recalibrated in real time, abandoning the harmonic strategy entirely, shifting to a physical-first doctrine that Pren had probably never needed to rely on. The next 90 seconds were the hardest of the tournament. Pren without the light tricks was still a 4th-seeded Korathi combat cadet with years of training, and a reach advantage that Senna couldn't match. They traded blows in tight exchanges, each one testing the other's recovery speed. Senna took a hit to the shoulder that sent a shockwave of pain down her left arm. She landed a low kick that buckled Pren's trailing leg. Pren recovered, pressed forward, caught Senna with an elbow that split the skin above her right eye. Blood ran down her face. She wiped it with the back of her hand, tasted copper, and kept her feet. The amphitheater's hum had dropped to something barely audible, 3,000 beings holding their breath in light language. Pren committed to a finishing combination. 3 strikes, each one designed to close the distance and force a clinch where the Korathi's reach would dominate. Senna read the sequence from the way Pren's weight shifted onto the balls of its feet and made a choice that she'd been holding in reserve since the first round. She didn't counter. She didn't evade. She took the first strike, absorbed it on her guard, stepped inside the second, and on the third she met Pren's extension with her entire body weight moving forward. The collision was ugly. Both fighters stumbled. But Senna's center of gravity was lower, her base was wider, and human skeletal structure was denser than Korathi frame. Pren went sideways. Senna stayed up. She followed the stumble with a leg sweep, took Pren down, and secured a hold. Pren yielded after 6 seconds. Senna stood up, blood still running from the cut above her eye, and looked at the bracket on the arena wall. 39th seed, quarterfinal winner, 3 bouts left. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt the ache in her shoulder, the sting of the cut, and the weight of 4 cadets who were walking back to their barracks with a loss on their record. Morith, Tail, Sok, Pren. Each one had spent years training for this. Each one was now carrying the mark of having been eliminated. By her. In the corridor, she passed Pren being escorted to the medical bay. The Koratha's chest light was dim, cycling through patterns Senna could read as dejection. Fourth seed, expected to reach the final, now carrying a quarterfinal loss to a 39th seed Terran that every promotion board would see. She'd been the instrument of that damage 4 times now. The walk back took her through the central atrium. Bioluminescent veins in the walls pulsed in a low, irregular frequency she'd never seen. The atrium was usually steady. Tonight it was agitated. 3,000 nervous systems processing something new. A display near the entrance showed the semi-final matchups. Deathworlder versus Ken on the other side, a Korathi showcase. Senna versus Vesk on hers, 2 cadets whose combat philosophies had nothing in common, fighting under rules that favored one of them, in a ring built for one of them, scored by judges from one of their species. The audience would watch Deathworlder versus Ken the way they watched a masterclass. They would watch Senna versus Vesk the way they watched a stress test. The semi-final was the next day. Senna spent the morning in the medical bay, having the cut above her eye resealed and her shoulder assessed. The Korathi medic worked in silence, its chest light pulsing in the clinical frequency that Senna had come to associate with professional neutrality. "The shoulder is bruised but functional," the medic said. "Full range of motion within 4 hours. The laceration is superficial." "Thank you." The medic paused. Its light pattern shifted into something Senna hadn't seen before. Personal, not clinical. "Cadet Akafer, there has not been a Terran in the semi-final in the 11 cycles I have served this institution." "I know. The Open Force Protocol begins in the semi-final. The restraint limitations from rounds 1 through 4 are removed." "I know that too." The medic's light went flat. "You will be fighting under rules that were designed for species with higher structural tolerances than yours. A Koratha's skeletal frame can absorb impact forces that would fracture human bone. The open force threshold was calibrated to Korathi physiology, not yours." Senna sat on the medical bay slab and looked at her hands. They were steady. "I understand what that means. I am required to inform you that you may withdraw from the tournament at any time, without medical objection." "Noted." The medic's light shifted into something personal. The last Terran to reach the advanced rounds was Captain Yao. She was returned after 7 weeks with a sensory limitation notation. "I treated her injuries before she left." The medic paused in the way that Senna had learned meant a Korathi was choosing words over light, prioritizing precision over speed. She asked whether the test was designed to find the best fighter or the best Korathi. "I did not understand the distinction at the time. I am beginning to understand it now." The medic sealed the cut, applied a dermal adhesive that smelled faintly of ozone, and said nothing else. That night, Senna pulled up the full tournament bracket in her quarters. 48 names struck through. Finn, the best hand-to-hand grappler in the cohort, eliminated in the first round by a harmonic stack that shut down motor control before the grapple started. Lycia, a Vrelian whose combat flow was beautiful to watch, reduced to a stumbling target by a Korathi whose output was simply brighter. Harvin, a Dreven who could hold ground against anything, eliminated because the tournament rewarded offense and couldn't measure the ability to hold position. The bracket ground through them like a machine, converting talent into a ranked list of failures. And Senna's immunity to the harmonic stacking wasn't skill, it was biology. Human eyes hadn't evolved in an environment where bioluminescence was a threat. She hadn't earned that advantage. She'd been born with it. She set the datapad down and tried to sleep. Senna's semi-final opponent was Vesk. The same Vesk who'd pulsed that dismissive staccato at her the day the bracket was announced. Second seed, considered by the instructors to be the technically finest fighter in the cohort. Vesk's combat doctrine combined harmonic stacking with physical precision in a way that was described, in the Korathi light language, as complete. Everything Vesk did was designed to close every avenue of response simultaneously. Under open force rules, the bout would continue until one fighter yielded, was incapacitated, or was unable to continue. The medical team would intervene if there was risk of permanent damage, but the threshold for permanent damage was calibrated to Korathi physiology, not human. Senna entered the ring knowing that a blow Vesk considered restrained might break her bones. The amphitheater was full to capacity. Cadets who hadn't attended earlier rounds were present. Instructors who normally observed remotely had come in person. The tone sounded. Vesk opened with the complete doctrine, harmonic stacking at maximum output, physical engagement at combat speed, every system firing at once. Senna had prepared for each element individually. She had not trained against all of them simultaneously. She closed her eyes again. The amphitheater fell silent. The first 30 seconds were survival. Vesk's speed was a tier above anything Senna had faced. The Koratha's strikes came in combinations of 5 and 6, each one targeting a different vulnerability, each one flowing into the next without pause. Senna blocked what she could, absorbed what she couldn't block, and let her body take damage in places that could take damage while protecting the places that couldn't. Vesk hit her in the ribs, something cracked. Senna felt the pain lance through her side, sharp and specific, and categorized it. Rib, probably the 9th, fractured, not displaced, functional, hurts, keep moving. She kept moving. Vesk pressed, sensing advantage, and the Koratha's chest light blazed in a pattern that Senna could feel as heat on her closed eyelids. The harmonic stack was now operating at a frequency that was causing sympathetic vibration in the arena structure. Other cadets in the audience were shielding their sensory organs. The referees were squinting. Senna heard it all. The hum of Vesk's musculature, the crack of Vesk's feet on the mat, the tiny variations in the air pressure as Vesk's long arms moved through their striking arcs. She opened her eyes for 1 second, just long enough to confirm Vesk's position, then closed them again and moved. She couldn't beat Vesk straight up. She knew that now, with a cracked rib and blood in her eye, and the certain knowledge that Vesk was better than her in every metric the Institute measured. But Vesk's doctrine required the opponent to respond predictably. Block, evade, counter, the triangulation of combat. Vesk was prepared for every combination of those 3 responses. Senna chose a 4th option. She stopped defending. Not recklessly, deliberately. She stopped blocking and started trading. Every time Vesk struck, Senna let the blow land and delivered her own in the same motion, accepting the damage to guarantee the hit. The first exchange cost her a blow to the forearm that numbed her left hand. She put a knee into Vesk's midsection that bent the Korathi forward. The second exchange cost her a strike to the jaw that made her vision strobe. She drove an elbow into Vesk's collarbone that she felt give under the impact. The amphitheater was making sounds it hadn't made before, not the spectator hum. Raw vocalization, the kind the light-dominant Korathi used so rarely it almost seemed involuntary. A sound torn out of 3,000 beings watching a fighter choose to take damage in exchange for dealing it. Vesk pulled back. The Korathi's collarbone was fractured, its chest light flickering with the disruption. Vesk's eyes, the narrow photoreceptive bands that sat above the chest cavity, were wide, not with pain, with something that the Korathi light language had a word for that translated roughly as the recognition of an opponent operating outside all known parameters. "Yield," Senna said. Her voice was steady, her ribs throbbing, her jaw swelling, her left hand numb from the forearm strike. "Your collarbone is broken. Your stacking is compromised. If we keep going under open force rules, one of us is going to get hurt badly enough that the medics can't fix it with a dermal patch." Vesk's chest light pulsed. The pattern was complex, layered. The referee and 3 instructors in the front row all leaned forward to read it. "You are asking me to yield," Vesk said. I'm asking you to calculate the cost. I have calculated it. Then you know this bout ends with one of us in the long-term medical unit, and the winner goes into the final tomorrow with injuries that will guarantee they lose. Vesk looked at her. The Koratha's photoreceptors narrowed, the bioluminescent musculature dimming to a flat, neutral glow. The spectator hum in the amphitheater dropped to silence. You would accept a yield from me knowing that it places you in the final. I would accept a yield from you knowing that we both walk out of this ring functional. Vesk's chest pulsed once, a single sharp pattern that the referee read and confirmed. Yield. The amphitheater erupted, not in approval or disapproval, in the recalibration frequency amplified by 3,000 chest cavities pulsing in unison. The sound was physical, a pressure wave that Senna felt in her broken rib, in her swollen jaw, in the bones of her skull. The referee confirmed the bout. Senna, semi-final winner, finalist. She walked out of the ring on her own feet, declined the medic stretcher, and made it to the recovery area before she allowed herself to lean against the wall and breathe through the pain. Instructor Prahl found her there 20 minutes later. You asked your opponent to yield rather than forcing the incapacitation, Prahl said. I did. The tournament protocol does not require you to offer that option. No. But Vesk spent 6 years training for this. A long-term medical stay could affect fleet assignment, command eligibility, entire career trajectory. I calculated the cost of winning against the damage required to win, and the numbers didn't work. Prahl's chest light dimmed. The tournament is designed to produce one winner. I know what it's designed to do. I'm asking what happens to the other 63. Prahl didn't answer. The Korathi turned and left, chest light pulsing in a pattern Senna had never seen before. She went to the medical bay to get her ribs stabilized. The final was the next morning. Senna's opponent was a Korathi named Deathworlder, first seed. The consensus pick to win the tournament since the beginning of the cycle. Deathworlder was the finest product of the Korathi combat doctrine, a fighter whose harmonic stacking, physical precision, tactical awareness, and competitive instinct had been optimized across 12 years of training. Senna walked into the ring with a stabilized rib, a sealed cut, a swollen jaw, a numb left hand that had partially recovered overnight, and the knowledge that she was outmatched. The amphitheater was beyond capacity. Cadets were standing in the aisles, a live feed broadcast to satellite facilities. This was the first time a Terran had stood in this ring at this stage, and the institution wanted its record of it. Senna stood at her entry point and found them in the seats. Morith in the upper tiers, dense skull angled toward the ring. Tail 3 rows below, chest light dim but steady. Sock coiled in a corner seat. Pren near the instructors. Vesk in the front row, collarbone wrapped. 5 cadets she'd beaten, all watching to see what she'd do with the opportunity their losses had created. Kor was there too. The 68th ranked Driven sat in the highest tier, the cheapest seats, angled toward Senna with the patient attention of a species that understood waiting. Deathworlder entered from the opposite side. The first seed's chest cavity pulsed in a pre-combat pattern that Senna recognized from the senior instructors, not the combat frequency, the assessment frequency. Deathworlder was studying her. The tone sounded. Deathworlder didn't attack. The first seed stood at the center of the ring, chest light cycling through a slow, deliberate sequence, and waited. Senna had seen this approach in the footage she'd studied. Deathworlder's signature opening was patience. The first seed let opponents commit first, read the commitment, and responded with precision that bordered on precognition. Senna circled. Deathworlder rotated to track her, economical, never overextending. The amphitheater's spectator hum was low and steady, the anticipation pattern. Senna attacked first. She had no choice. Deathworlder's patience would outlast her injured body's ability to circle. She closed distance with a combination she'd been holding in reserve. a sequence she'd never used in any training bout or tournament round, something she'd built specifically for a fighter who read patterns and punished repetition. The combination was designed to look like a mistake, a committed lead strike that left her midsection exposed, followed by a wide hook that pulled her weight offline, followed by what appeared to be a stumble as her injured rib flared with pain. None of it was real. The lead strike was a feint. The wide hook was a setup. The stumble was a controlled drop that put her beneath Deather's counter-timing. Deather read the feint as a feint, read the setup as a setup. Read the drop as what it was, a controlled entry into Deather's underdefined lower engagement zone, the space below the Korath's optimized striking arc, where the narrow-bodied species had limited defensive options. Deather was faster than Senna expected. The first seed adjusted, dropped its own stance, and met Senna's low entry with a sprawl that demonstrated training she hadn't seen in any footage. Deather had prepared for this exact approach. The first seed had done what Senna did, studied the opponent, found the approach, built the counter. The difference was that Deather had 12 years of training behind the counter and the reflexes to execute it at full speed. The scramble lasted 8 seconds, both fighters on the mat, neither able to establish control. Senna's rib screamed. Deather's reach found her shoulder and twisted. Senna drove a knee into Deather's hip and felt the impact through the Korath's narrow frame. For a moment they were locked together, two fighters from species that had never shared a planet, grappling in a ring built for one of them, and Senna could feel Deather's heartbeat through the Korath's translucent skin, fast and steady, a rhythm that carried no fear. They separated, both stood, both breathing hard. The amphitheater's hum had shifted into sustained attention. Senna circled again, slower. Her rib punished every step. She cataloged the damage, pain constant, left hand 70%, vision functional, jaw swollen. Diminished but operational. Deather didn't need to attack, it only needed to wait. The second exchange was cleaner. Senna tested Deather's right side, found it defended, tested the left, found it faster. She committed to a combination, and the first seed caught her lead arm, redirected her momentum, and put her on the mat with a throw that used her own motion against her. She hit the surface hard. The rib cracked further. Pain flooded her side white-hot, and for a moment her vision narrowed to a tunnel. The smart mat absorbed the impact, adjusted, held her like a hand pressing her flat. She rolled, got to her feet, tasted blood from where she'd bitten her tongue on impact. The amphitheater was silent in the way that 3,000 beings are silent when they're watching someone decide whether to stay down. Deather was waiting, patient, not pressing the advantage. The first seed's chest light was steady, and Senna read the pattern without needing translation. The fight is mine, whenever you're ready to acknowledge it. Senna straightened. The pain was real. The damage was real. Her rib was now fully fractured, her movement compromised, her left hand still numb from yesterday's semi-final. Deather was unhurt, unflustered, and in complete control of the ring. She could yield. The referee would accept it. She'd place second in the tournament, a result that no Terran had ever achieved at the Korathi Unified Combat Institute. Her record would reflect a performance that exceeded every model, every prediction, every assumption the institution had made about her species. Second place, out of 64, for a species the institute had seeded 39th. She looked at Deather, and something clicked into focus that had been forming since the bracket first appeared on the wall. The thing that had been bothering her about the math. The thing she couldn't articulate until this exact moment, standing in the ring with broken ribs and blood in her mouth, and a first seed waiting for her to accept the inevitable. The tournament didn't just find a winner, it consumed everyone else to do it. Every round, every bout, every brilliantly engineered elimination was a machine for turning 63 capable, trained, dedicated cadets into a ranked list of failures. Morith, who was methodical and strong and would have been an excellent combat officer. Tail, whose light techniques were dazzling and precise. Sok, whose instinctive combat flow was beautiful to watch. Pren, who had the courage to abandon a failing strategy mid-fight and adapt. Vesk, who had the discipline to yield when the cost exceeded the prize. All of them were sitting in the amphitheater right now. All of them carrying the weight of a loss. All of them diminished not because they'd gotten worse, but because the system had measured them against a single axis and found them short. And Senna had been the instrument. Every victory she'd earned had been purchased with someone else's defeat. "Yield," Senna said. The amphitheater went dead silent, not the quiet of anticipation, the silence of 3,000 beings who had all stopped processing simultaneously. Deether's chest light went dark, completely dark. The Korathi equivalent of speechlessness. "I yield," Senna said again. Her voice was steady. The pain in her rib was constant, and she let it be constant, and she let it not matter. "This is my decision. This bout is over." The referee stepped forward, photoreceptors wide, judicial light pattern faltering. "Cadet Akafer, confirm your action." "Confirmed, I yield." The amphitheater began to pulse. Not the recalibration frequency. Not the spectator hum. Something else entirely, something Senna had never heard in 3 months at the Institute. A collective light pattern that spread from the front rose through the tiers and up to the highest seats. 3,000 chest cavities pulsing in a frequency that the Korathi used so rarely it had no common name. Inquiry. The frequency meant inquiry, not confusion, not outrage, a genuine, species-deep question being asked to no one in particular. Deether's light returned. The first seed's chest cavity pulsed in a pattern directed at Senna, and it was Instructor Prahl, standing at the edge of the ring, who translated. Deether asks why. Senna looked at Deether, at the amphitheater, at the bracket on the wall with its branching tree of names. All of them struck through except the one empty box at the top that now had Deether's name in it, and 63 lines leading down from it like roots. "Because the tournament is designed to produce one winner," Senna said, "and I spent 6 days watching what it does to everyone else. I won 5 rounds. I beat 5 cadets. Every one of them was good enough to serve in any fleet, hold any command, fight any fight. The tournament took that from them, not because they weren't good enough, because the system needed them to lose so it could find the one it wanted." The amphitheater's inquiry pulse intensified. "I can win this fight," Senna said, cold, flat, the way the Korathi would state a tactical assessment. "My rib is broken and Deether is better than me on every axis you measure, but I've beaten better-seated fighters every round and I could find a way. The system would function exactly as designed." She paused. "But the system is wrong, not because competition is wrong. Because this tournament measures one thing by destroying 63 others, and nobody in this institution has ever stood in this ring and asked whether the cost is worth the measurement." Prahl stepped into the ring. "You are asserting that the assessment methodology is flawed." "I'm asserting that a system that can only identify excellence by producing 63 ranked failures is measuring the wrong thing, or measuring the right thing the wrong way. Measure how many cadets are ready for fleet operations, not which one is best. How many are good enough?" Prahl was quiet for a long time. "The tournament result will stand as recorded. Deether is champion. Cadet Akafer places second by voluntary yield." Senna nodded. She'd expected nothing different. "However," Prahl's chest light shifted into the institutional frequency, the one that carried policy. "A formal inquiry into the Crucible tournament's methodology will be initiated at the conclusion of this cycle. You are the first cadet to question the tournament from inside the final. Others questioned it from outside, from positions where they could be dismissed as bitter. You questioned it from a position where you had nothing to gain and a championship to lose." A hum rose from the seats, not the spectator frequency, something older. It started from the eliminated cadets in the upper tiers and spread down through the ranks until even the instructors at ringside were resonating with it. Acknowledgement, not approval. Acknowledgement that something had been said that the institution needed to hear. Senna walked out of the ring on her own feet. Her rib ached. Her jaw was swollen. Her left hand was tingling with returning sensation. The bracket on the wall showed Deether's name in the top box and hers one level below, connected by the single line that meant voluntary yield. At the exit she found Morith waiting, her first-round opponent, compact and steady on all four limbs. "I have been carrying that loss for 6 days," Morith said, reviewing it, adjusting my self-assessment downward with each review. "Today you called the tournament a system that measures excellence by destroying everyone who isn't the winner." The Dreven's dense skull tilted. "My loss to you has occupied more of my processing than the 3 months of training that preceded it. The training made me competent. The loss made me doubt the competence. Your assessment of the system is more valuable than the championship would have been." Senna nodded once. Morith clicked its 4 feet on the floor and walked away. Sock was next. The Vrelian leaned against the corridor wall. "You offered me a hand in round 3. I didn't take it. I was angry." Sock's flexible body uncoiled to full height. "I don't hate you now. If you offer your hand again, I will take it." Senna extended her hand. Sock's grip was light, barely there, the touch of a species that could feel vibration through skin contact. "Your species is strange," Sock said. "I know." That evening, Kor sat down across from her in the mess hall, the Dreven who had never made the bracket. "You could have one," Kor said. "Maybe. You chose not to." "I chose to ask a question that mattered more than the answer the tournament was designed to give." "I ranked 68th. You placed 2nd. Neither number captures what either of us is actually worth." Kor stood, 4 legs unfolding. "Systems are built by species. Species are changed by questions." Kor left. Senna sat alone and looked out the viewport at the gas giant the Institute orbited. She wondered whether the system would change. She thought it probably would, eventually, because the Korathi were scientists before they were warriors, and scientists followed data. She decided the championship wouldn't have been worth more than the question, and she decided it not with satisfaction but with the quiet, tired clarity of someone who had paid the cost of the answer and was still calculating whether the cost had been too high. 5 cadets had lost to her, 5 records marked. The yield didn't erase the damage she'd already done. It only stopped her from doing more of it. The viewport showed her reflection against the gas giant's bands. A 17-year-old human with a sealed cut above her eye, a jaw that was still slightly swollen, and hands that were steady. She left the mess hall, walked to her quarters, and slept without dreaming.